Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down Marxism as a theory. I'll be going into its origins, notable theorists, main concepts, criticisms, and where Marxism fits in today's world. You guys really liked the video where I introduced sociology as a subject, which you can see in this video right here. So I asked you guys in my community tab which sociological theory you'd like me to cover next, which is why I'm covering Marxism today. If you have any ideas on which theory or perspective you'd like me to cover next, then comment below or go to the poll in my community tab and vote right there. But let's get right into the video. Now, quick disclaimer, which I'm going to read off from my notes. Before I begin, the contents of this video is academic research and for educational purposes only. My views are my own and I'm neither condoning or rejecting Marxism. Please share your thoughts respectively and any hate comments will be deleted. Now, let's get into the origins of Marxism as a theory. Now, of course, we know that the theory of Marxism got its name from its founder, Karl Marx. And to understand Marxism, we need to get to know the man himself. And Karl Heinrich Marx, I think I'm pronouncing his name okay, hopefully, he was born on the 5th of May, 1818 in Western Germany. He was exiled several times before settling into London because of his work, which centered around the working class, aka the proletariat, overthrowing the ruling class, which were called the bourgeoisie in his theories. And of course, governments didn't like that. And when he was in London, he actually met his good friend Engels, where actually he might have met him before. Anyway, he had his friend Engels who supported him financially and they worked together a lot. And in London was where he wrote the Communist Manifesto, which outlined his theory and reasonings behind communism. It has to be noted that Marx actually lived through quite a lot of social unrest at the time. There was a lot of revolutions going on, so this probably influenced his thinking. And, where other theorists like Hegel thought that history and society were there to be interpreted, Marx actually thought that they should and could be changed. Now, before we get into detailing the main Marxist ideas, let's talk about some of the notable theorists and scholars within the Western Marxist school of thought. Now, there's Antonio Gramsci, who is best known for his concept of cultural hegemony, which basically talks about how humans can't always be forced into doing things by physical power, which means that we have to be controlled also by ideas. There's also Louis Althusser, who introduced the idea of the ideological state apparatus, which is a much more structuralist angle on Marx. Ideology for him was a core part of life that even the ruling class can't escape. So literally everything is ruled by ideology and is within the system and structure of society. And there's also Pierre Bourdieu, who isn't a Marxist per se, but he was heavily influenced by the works of Karl Marx. He is associated with the Marxist school of thought for this reason, since a lot of his work is based around the idea of power, social dynamics, and the transfer of power. And of course, there are many other people, but these are the main people that you're going to encounter in university and A-level around your Marxist theory. And these have also influenced my own academic studies. As you study more, you'll realize that theorists don't strictly fit into one theory or another. They will fall under many. And I think that's the really great thing about it, is that every theorist and scholar brings something of their own onto the table and they can be interpreted and fed into your own work. Now let's go into the main theories and concepts within Marxism. And there's going to be some key terms that you're going to have to know. I've mentioned already the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. The proletariat being the normal working people, or working class, as Marx put it. And these are people who are controlled by the bourgeoisie, aka the ruling class, and the elites. So these are the people who control the factors of production, which I'll go into a little bit later. So the first concept that you're going to want to know is the economic base and the superstructure. As you can see from this diagram here, the economic base and the superstructure is the key idea where the economic base, which is anything around the means of production, so like land, labor, capital, supports everything that goes on top, which is the superstructure. So this is where the cultural and social institutions sit on. So both these reinforce and enforce each other, right? These don't exist in isolation. So things like money, the economy will influence what happens in society, such as education, media, family, religion, all that stuff. Everything is there. Everything is contained within this structure. So the next concept that you're going to need to know is conflict and alienation. Of course, Marxism saw that, history is made up of conflict between the working class and the ruling class, bourgeoisie and proletariat, as I mentioned before. And in Marx's words, society as a whole is more and more splitting up into two great hostile camps, into two great classes directly facing each other, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Marx and Engels, 1848. As industrialization was speeding up and technology improved, those who owned the means of production, like capital and land and labor and machinery, had more and more control over the people who worked for them. And the people who worked for them were no longer exchanging, their time and their efforts for things like boarding, food, as they would back then when, there was like the peasants and the landlords and all those things. They were now exchanging their time and labor for money, right? They were no longer seeing the fruits of their production. So in order to prevent workers from revolting, right, because the conditions were getting worse and worse in Victorian times, there was all that pollution, people were dying, children had to work. So in order for them to stop the workers from revolting and rebelling, they had to separate the workers from the fruits and products of their labor as much as possible, so they can't see what they're actually creating. And this means that the division of labor prevents the worker from being attached from the end product, the process, and from themselves, which means that they don't see the whole picture, and therefore they don't know what they're rebelling against. This is called alienation. And the third concept that is pretty big in Marxism is class consciousness and false consciousness. Consciousness is defined as the state of being aware of and responsive to one's surroundings. And therefore, Marx's idea of false consciousness is just that, basically how the ideology of the working class, of the workers, is not actually their own and don't have their best interests at heart, because the ideology is that of the dominant class, which is the ruling class, aka bourgeoisie, who controls everything. So it's not actually good for the working class to believe this. Some examples of false consciousness are things like we live in a meritocracy, competition over cooperation, and individualism over community, right? And these are the things that we believe, allegedly, according to Marxism, that prevent us from getting together and rebelling, because we don't recognize that things like community and cooperation, and that we don't live in a meritocracy, so that we don't see the whole picture. Right? And on the other hand, you have class consciousness, which is what Marx wants everyone to get to, so that the working people can overthrow the bourgeoisie. And class consciousness refers to how the proletariat, the working person, is aware of the status in society. And when enough people are aware, that's when the revolution will begin. Now for critiques. Of course, traditional Marxism is far from perfect, I'm telling you, as a sociologist, as someone who has who does understand and believe some of these observations, right? There's things like Marxist feminism, neo-Marxism, new left, and we won't have time to go into all of those today, but those make it clear that traditional Marxism doesn't have it all covered. So the main critiques is way too simplistic, and there are more than two classes. There's more than just the working class and the elites, right? There's a lot of people in between, and Marxism doesn't really take that into account. It just kind of sees them as two camps in opposition, and personally I don't think that is productive to getting us together and for society to come together, if you ask me. The second critique is that Marxism strips people of their autonomy and reduces them to just passive people who just seem like we're going along with everything, and we seem that we are, just taking the bait of bread and circus, which is another concept of Marxism, that we're just so distracted with the circus and we get the bread, which is the basic necessities of life, that we don't want to revolt, we don't want to rebel, we don't understand what's going on. But actually, people do understand. It's just because the way the system is built, we have to keep working for money because that's the only way you're going to survive, unfortunately. And the third critique is that most communist societies have actually collapsed and are not able to overthrow the bourgeoisie. And that's kind of the irony of Marxism, is that when you have a revolution, which unfortunately, according to Marx, has to be violent, when you have the revolution, there's always going to be someone leading the revolution, and you always have to form some sort of society after the revolution, and there's always going to be a central government at least, and so there's always going to be people in power. Unfortunately, this is the way it is right now. And personally, even though I believe some of these and agree with some of these observations from the Marxist school of thought, life is far more nuanced than is presented by Marxism traditionally. And of course, traditional Marxism doesn't go into problems around misogyny, patriarchy, and like racism, things like that, which are obviously huge roles in society, which are massive movements right now as well. So there's a lot of things that Marxism doesn't cover, but the core foundations of Marxism are pretty interesting, might I say. And so if you're interested in learning more about Marxism, definitely check out the Communist Manifesto, which is pretty easy to read, and I've linked below the English translation of it. So what is Marxism up to today? What is the big guy Karl Marx gonna say about the state of the world today, right? Amongst all the social unrest and uncertainty that has been happening, especially over the last 2 years, or sorry, might I say, has been revealed, particularly over the last 2 years, and the amount of inequalities that have widened, it's clear that some of the Marxist concepts are being played out here. So, for example, let's say the education system, transmitting certain ideologies and banning others, right? It's, as a sociology student, you might question, okay, what is this ideology? Who does it benefit? Why are they enforcing or banning certain ideologies in schools? Because the education system is where ideology is transmitted to children. And because if you think about it, it is like a cooking pot, an oven, where a lot of thought is being transformed and molded in kids. So like, what are kids being taught to think and why? That's some things that you might want to ask when you hear headlines of things being banned, or parents protesting against some things in schools, which aren't really happening. But anyway, we won't get into that. And also the media glorifying wealthy individuals without acknowledging the harm that they do to society and how they perpetuate harm in order to maintain their position. So like big Silicon Valley CEOs who are glorified, although, you know, things are starting to come to light, for example, garment workers or underpaying people in factories and warehouses of certain companies. So yeah, those are all ideas that are under Marxism. So the thing about theory is that they're all good and well. Theories are great. But when it comes to the actual world, it's much more important to apply them to things that you see in your life, whether you're at school, whether you're at university, whether you're working. And that's how you will see that things are actually played out and are much more interesting and much more applicable than you think they might be. So my own questions are, did Marx intend for his theories to be used in the way that a lot of leaders in the world, especially communist leaders, have used his theories? Like, would he agree? What would he say about the state of the world today? What would he say about how the world is moving? Like, where does he think the world is going to go? So yeah, it's really interesting, and it's impossible to cover the entirety of the theory in one video. So this is just a brief rundown of the main things. There are going to be some things that I have missed, and I already realized I have missed some things. But if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. Let me know how you found this video and what theory you want me to cover next. But with all that said, I will see you in my next one. Bye.